Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. As you heard from our speaker, that we are here for the Taxonomy of Intervention Intensity, a case study for building intervention intensity in reading comprehension. My name is Tessie Rose Bailey, and I will be your moderator for today. Before we begin, I want to orient you to a couple of logistical details about this webinar. On the webinar, you will see a box on the right where you can submit questions or comments at any time. For technical issues and questions, a webinar team member will try to assist you as soon as possible. For content questions, please feel free to submit your questions at any time. I, as the moderator, will respond to the question in the chat box or will present them to the speaker during the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. In addition, I will be sharing resources from NCII related to the content discussed by the webinar in the chat box. Today's webinar is the second webinar in a three-part series. The first webinar focused on the use of DBI to intensify math interventions. A recording of this webinar can be found on NCII's updated website. Today's webinar, the second, will model how DBI can be used to intensify a reading intervention. And the last webinar, which is scheduled for September, will focus on using the taxonomy to select and intensify behavior interventions. There are two downloadable resources that will be referenced during the webinar. You can find those in the handout pull-down on the right side of your menu. The first handout is a rating form that the presenter will use to model how to rate and intensify an intervention using the taxonomy. The second resource is a one-page summary of the Taxonomy of Intervention Intensity Dimensions that will be briefly discussed today. As I mentioned, my name is Tessie Rose Bailey. I am a Principal Technical Assistance Consultant here at the National Center on Intensive Interventions. My role is a moderator. I am pleased to introduce our speaker today, Meagan Walsh. She is a doctoral student at Vanderbilt University and works directly with Dr. Len Fuchs in researching DBI and the taxonomy. Prior to coming to Vanderbilt, she spent 6 years as a K-5 special education resource teacher in Las Vegas, Nevada, Rockford, Illinois, and Sioux Falls, South Dakota. While teaching, Meagan received her Master's of Education in Special Education from the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. Her experiences in the classroom made her passionate about supporting students with the most difficult to treat learning and behavioral challenges. Along those lines, she is working on developing a reading comprehension intervention for students in the intermediate grades as part of her doctoral program. Please welcome me in joining Meagan Walsh.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to this intervention. I'm so glad that you're able to join us on this summer afternoon. Like Dr. Bailey mentioned, I'm going to be talking about the taxonomy of intensive intervention today. I'm going to start out with very briefly, kind of giving you a summary of what the taxonomy is and how it relates to the DBI process. And then I'm going to go through a comprehensive case study example to show you how this could be used in the area of reading comprehension. Briefly, the Taxonomy of Intensive Intervention is a system for describing an intervention in terms of 7 dimensions along which intensity can vary. It helps special educators and interventionists to identify best match intervention platforms. This would be the setup phase of the DBI process. And then it also can help special educators and interventionists to formulate adjustments to boost student progress as part of that DBI process. As Tessie mentioned, there is a sample taxonomy of intensive intervention form that's provided in your handout section. Feel free to look at that as we're talking through this case study today. You can even kind of think through how you would rate the different dimensions. The left side of the form would be used during the setup phase of the DBI process when you're rating an intensive intervention platform. And then the right side of the form would be used during the DBI process in the implementation phase when it's time to make instructional adjustments. As I mentioned before, the taxonomy is 7 dimensions, basically, along which intensity can vary. I like to think of it like a soundboard. So there's these 7 different sliders that we can use that we can slowly turn up the volume for students to intensify an intervention platform. The first is strength. When I say strength, I mean the standardized effect size. And specifically, I mean effect sizes for students in the 20th percentile or below. Dosage, this means not only just how many sessions are provided as part of the intervention platform, but also how many opportunities does a student have to respond as part of this intervention. Alignment refers to the degree to which an intervention is aligned to all of the needs that a student has, and also that it doesn't include things that they don't need. In reading, that means that if they need comprehension only, the intervention should have lots of different comprehension components, but it shouldn't have any fluency or decoding components. That would be less aligned. Also, alignment refers to the inclusion of grade level curricular standards as well for a particular student. The fourth dimension is attention to transfer, the degree to which the intervention specifically thinks about how they're going to get kids to generalize the skills taught in that intervention to other settings and contexts. And the fifth dimension is comprehensiveness. This refers to the number of explicit teaching principles that are incorporated in the program. The sixth dimension is behavioral support. This is both that the intervention includes different strategies to support executive function and self-regulation, and also that it has strategies that are part of it that minimize non-productive behavior. And finally, the seventh dimension is individualization. That's the progress monitoring tool that we use to collect data on how well an intensive intervention is working for a given student. We use those 7 different dimensions in the setup phase of DBI, as I mentioned before, to help us select a validated best match tier 2 intervention. And that's going to serve as the base for intervention for our students. We might also in this setup phase make some initial adjustments to make that tier 2 intervention more aligned for the particular student that we're going to use it for. Most intervention packages, intervention platforms that you will find are validated with tier 2 students. That means students who are in the 50th percentile or below, and typically the students in need of intensive intervention are those who are below the 20th percentile. So sometimes an intervention might need some initial tweaks to make it work even better for the student that we're using it for. And then it's probably going to need some more tweaks because DBI, we know, is a process. It's a continual cycle where we're constantly looking at data and making changes for our students. And so in the DBI process, whenever we see that our student isn't making the progress that we would like them to make from that progress monitoring data, we would collect additional data and then use the taxonomy to help us formulate smart, targeted adjustments so that we can just amp up the power basically on our interventions to make it more effective for students and hopefully start moving them towards their goals.
Hey, Megan.
All right. Yeah.
Megan.
Yeah.
we've had some audio issues on some of the computers. So if you could just slow down a little bit.
Sure.
I also want to orient the folks to the chat box where she mentioned a lot of resources. If you're unfamiliar with DBI, I'll be posting some resources in there as well.
Great. Thank you, Tessie. Okay, so that was a very brief description of what the taxonomy is. I encourage you, if you have any questions, to look at that handout, which describes those dimensions in a little bit more detail. Also, there is an overview of the taxonomy of intervention intensity webinar that was pre-recorded, and that will be available in the chat box as well if you want to hear more about what the taxonomy is. Now I'm going to move into our reading comprehension example with our student today, Arianna. That's not her real name or her real picture, but Arianna is a real student, and I hope that as we talk through this example, you'll be able to think about some of the students that you work with and maybe identify a few students in your mind for whom some of the different things and strategies that we're talking about today might be applicable or helpful. The purpose of this example is to illustrate how the DBI process can work with the taxonomy tool to help provide the most effective program for a student receiving intensive intervention in reading comprehension. And I want to point out that this is going to be a reading comprehension example. This would be for a student who does not require fluency or decoding intervention, or who maybe has already met those goals and is ready for something else. And the reason we wanted to talk about comprehension is because sometimes comprehension can be a little bit messy to think about and in the DBI context. So we felt like this would be a good example to share with you. Let's talk about Arianna a little bit here before we start. Arianna has experienced persistent academic failure. That means her academic failure didn't just start, it's kind of been going on for some time. In 4th grade, she participated in a Tier 2 reading intervention, and on some levels, it did seem to do she made some progress. By the end of the year, she'd made some really strong growth in her fluency, but unfortunately, she really struggled to make gains in comprehension. So the evaluation team met and they looked at her Tier 2 reading intervention data, and they gave her some additional evaluations, and the evaluation team determined that Arianna had a specific reading comprehension disability, and they recommended intensive reading intervention as part of her IEP. Arianna isn't the only type of student for whom an intervention like this would be appropriate. Reading comprehension deficits can be hard to find. In students, they can be masked by other things. So for example, you could have a student with a diagnosis of attention deficit disorder, and you might think that, you might not notice that their deficits in reading comprehension go beyond just what is the problems caused by lack of attention. Students with behavioral disorders and emotional disorders sometimes can have reading comprehension deficits. Students with autism sometimes can read well, but require, they can read the words well, but then they can't answer any questions about them. Students with language impairments, students who have previously done well with fluency interventions like Arianna did, these are all students who might benefit from a reading comprehension intervention. As far
Meagan.
as her, yeah.
It's Tessie again.
Yeah, hey.
We've just had another request. Yeah, just to slow down a little bit, just because the
Definitely.
audio delays. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Let me know if it needs more. Thank you, Tessie. All right. Let's talk about the deficits that Arianna has in reading. Arianna typically recalls irrelevant or erroneous information when she reads a text. So she'll tell you things that weren't there, or only a part of what was there when she finishes. She typically can't identify the most important information or the main idea of a text. She doesn't use evidence when she answers factual questions. You'll notice that on standardized tests. You might also notice that if you are just asking her a question about what she read, she might answer with something kind of just out there from her background knowledge. Typically, she doesn't integrate her background knowledge with textual evidence in order to answer inferential questions. This might be because she doesn't have the background knowledge, but it also could be because she just isn't able to make the connections between what she knows and what she sees in the text to answer the questions well. She also struggles to synthesize main ideas to identify larger themes or big ideas in the text. And she has specific difficulty with nonfiction text. Specifically, any text that has an unfamiliar structure, for example, a comparative structure, a persuasive structure, a descriptive. These structures can be a little bit more complex and difficult, and they typically include some more complex vocabulary and information as well, which just kind of heightens the difficulties with comprehension that Arianna is already having. Arianna also demonstrates limited academic vocabulary and content area knowledge. She has some strengths, though, in reading. She has decent reading fluency. She's reading kind of near grade level, maybe not quite right on, but she's close. As far as word reading and decoding goes, she is able to decode multisyllabic words. She can decode most vowel patterns without any difficulty. So she really has a lot of strengths when it comes to word reading. It's just not applying or moving towards her comprehension at this point. Because she's in 5th grade, her reading comprehension deficits are starting to impact other academic areas. So she's starting to struggle in science and social studies. She might be getting failing grades in some other courses. Maybe she has to take a written test in music or PE, and she just bombs it because she just really struggles with the reading portion. And so it's starting to just kind of affect every academic area, including math, because the word problems are becoming more complex and more reading is involved all the time. She has pretty good behavior in the classroom. However, she's very quiet, and if the class is discussing something, she typically will not participate. She'll hold back. She won't answer questions directly, and sometimes she can appear a little bit distracted, maybe looking out the window. She's not really completing work at the pace you would like her to. Not huge concerns. She's not externalizing or making a lot of noise, but she just seems to not be participating at the same level as her typical peers. All right, so now because Arianna has qualified for intensive intervention, we start the DBI process with her. From this point on in the presentation, whenever you see an orange title, that's a slide or point in the process where I'm applying the taxonomy of intensive intervention. If there's a gray title, that means that this is just part of the DBI process. All right, the first part of the DBI process, step 1, is to identify and select a best match validated tier 2 intervention. A great place to go to start the search for validated tier 2 interventions is the National Center on Intensive Intervention website. You can access their tools chart, and it lets you kind of like select reading and the grade level, and then you can look at the instructional foci and decide, okay, which one would be a good best match. Unfortunately, reading comprehension is an area of research where a lot is being done currently, but until a few years ago, there really were not a lot of wonderful resources that focused exclusively on reading comprehension. So Ms. Smith, who really wants a reading comprehension intervention focused on nonfiction text, she goes on the NCII website and she sees, oh, there's really not a really great option for Arianna. But she remembers something. She saw a presentation at a professional conference where the researchers were sharing about a new reading comprehension intervention that was being developed. So Ms. Smith, being the resourceful teacher that she is, reaches out to the principal investigator for more information about that particular intensive intervention platform. And that researcher shares some information as well as materials about this program, which is called Reading Detectives. And Ms. Smith decides to rate this program using her taxonomy form. So at this point, if you guys want to kind of get your taxonomy form out and you want to look at it or get it up on your screen and think about it a little bit as I kind of walk through this next process. A little bit about what the Reading Detectives program is. It's a validated tier 2 intervention. It contains 42 lessons that are 45 minutes each, designed to be delivered 2-to-1 with 2 kids and 1 interventionist. It focuses exclusively on reading comprehension and nonfiction text. That means there's no fluency or decoding components, and all of the text is nonfiction. The texts are written at a 4th and 5th grade level, and they're arranged in instructional units. The units are animals, explorers, Egypt, the Olympics, and civil rights. The intervention platform provides explicit strategy instruction. That means that it's teaching explicitly several different reading comprehension strategies. They include creating main ideas, answering factual and inferential questions, previewing text features, vocabulary, etc. The program offers training with a variety of text structures, and it's specifically targeted for students in the intermediate grades. All of the lessons that are delivered in pairs follow a very prescribed format. There's a pre-reading portion, then students very carefully take turns reading the paragraphs and creating main ideas. Then after reading, they identify themes and answer various questions. Throughout the program, support is scaffolded so that the interventionist or tutor has multiple opportunities and multiple different ways of addressing students' needs when they're answering questions or creating main idea and providing targeted feedback. But there's also kind of a gradual releasing of control so that the partner takes over the role of providing that support towards the end of the program as students move more and more towards independence with those strategies. The Reading Detectives program also includes some executive function components. When I say executive function, I mean executive function is a pretty broad construct. It includes working memory and attention and self-regulation and a lot of different things. But this particular intervention asks students to recall previously created main ideas, to update theme predictions frequently, recalling while doing work where you have to hold something in your head that's typically called a span skill. It's part of working memory. Updating is another aspect of reading memory. And it also asks students throughout the program to self-monitor their use of strategies, which is a self-regulation component. All right, so that's a little bit about the reading detective intervention. Now it's time to rate it. And we would use scores of 0 to 3, 0 meaning there's nothing, and 3 that it addresses the standard very well. All right, so let's first talk about strength. When I say strength, remember I mean effect sizes. And you may recall, or you may have heard, that typically we have some rules of thumb for interpreting effect sizes. Typically, if it's an effect size over 0.5, we consider that pretty large. An effect size between 0.3 and 0.5 would be moderate, and effect sizes below 0.3 would be small. I do have to put a little caveat in here, though. We're talking about reading comprehension, and effect sizes for reading comprehension tend to be smaller. Also, we're talking about intermediate students, so the effect sizes will be smaller still. So it might even be better to think about it as like 0.4 and above being large, and below 0.4 to 0.2 would be moderate. Below 0.2 might be small. Also, you have to think about the type of assessment. Most interventions, you can see this one reports several different effect sizes. So most research programs where they're validating an intensive intervention platform, they're going to use a whole suite of assessments to evaluate the effects of their intervention. And so you kind of have to look at the different measures and how students perform on the different measures that they're given. And if you think of measures along a spectrum from near transfer, meaning that it's pretty much directly assessing the skills that students are taught in the intervention, to far transfer, which would be things like the Woodcock-Johnson passage comp, or a Gates-McGinnity reading test, or the ITBS, like any type of standardized norm referenced assessment. That's assessing a whole bunch of skills, not just the skills that were taught in the intervention. So we think of that as a far transfer test. Typically, moving the needle on far transfer is pretty hard, and especially in reading comprehension, it's really hard. And so near transfer, we'd expect it to be a little bit bigger, and far transfer, we'd expect it to be small. Also note that these are disaggregated effect sizes. So these might not be the effect sizes you find in the intervention report. These are the effect sizes that the principal investigator provided to Ms. Smith that are for the students who are in the 20th percentile and below. And with that, we see some effect sizes that are kind of in that small to moderate range on things like making main ideas and answering text-based inference questions. But we also find several near transfer effect sizes that are in the moderate range, right? So we can see that students are generally, or it seems to, that they're learning the skills that we're hoping the intervention teaches, creating main ideas, answering factual questions, and answering inference questions. It should be noted that you see this kind of giant effect size down here. The knowledge acquisition test is a test that's testing students' like acquisition of vocabulary and content that they would have experienced in tutoring, but probably didn't read anything about in their general ed or business as usual control condition. So we expect the effect size on this to be pretty large, but in Arianna's case, an effect size like this means that she might be able to use these strategies to learn the knowledge and the content that she needs to learn in a subject like social studies or science, where we know that she has some deficits. So it is actually a potentially important effect size to consider. That far transfer effect size is disappointing, right? So it's pretty small, but that isn't out of line from most comprehension interventions, and you're going to have a pretty difficult time finding any comprehension interventions that are going to demonstrate large effects on FAR transfer for a student below the 20th percentile. So, how would you rate the strength of this intervention? I personally would give it a 2. I wouldn't say that all of these effect sizes are strong or large. Some are small, some are moderate, and some are big. So I'd say I'd go with the middle. It's about a 2. There's moderate evidence this is going to be a strong enough intervention for Arianna. All right, the next taxonomy dimension is dosage. Dosage refers to the quantity of intervention that a intervention platform is going to provide. We know that this intervention is going to provide 45 sessions, 42 sessions, 45 minutes in length in a 2-to-1 setting. Think about your own schools or the classrooms where you work. How intensive is that in terms of dosage compared to the students that you see? I know for myself and the schools that I worked with, being able to see students 2-to-1, even in a special education classroom or an intervention setting, that's pretty intensive. And if we're thinking about opportunities to respond, a student in a 2-to-1 setting is going to have many more opportunities to respond than a student in a large group. In fact, if we were to take one of these reading detective lessons and look at the number of opportunities a student gets to speak, I was able to count about 230 opportunities for the student to speak and receive feedback from the interventionist in a single session. So that's quite a bit of opportunity for a student to respond that is far more intense than what they would get in their classroom. So I would give this one a score of 3. All right, the next dimension of the taxonomy would be instructional alignment. And we're looking at 3 different standards here. The degree that the intervention addresses the student's skill deficits, the degree that it does not address extraneous skills, and then the degree that it addresses grade appropriate standards. Well, first of all, let's think about her deficits. She has a deficit in reading comprehension. She has deficits in nonfiction text. She can't make main ideas. She's struggling with factual and inference questions. All of those are things that are targeted by this intervention specifically. So I would say that this intervention should get a 3 as far for targeting her specific skill deficits. I would say that it also should get a 3 for not addressing any extraneous skills. So we're not focusing on fluency or decoding at all. And a lot of interventions that include comprehension also include some sort of phonics and decoding component. So the fact that those components aren't there means that this is going to be a more aligned intervention for Arianna. Also, the content that's included in this intervention supports grade level and grade appropriate standards. So civil rights, that's something that is talked about and covered typically in a lot of 5th grade curriculum. There's text about Jane Goodall, who happens to be covered, and adaptations and ecosystems in the animals unit. Those are all things that are covered as part of the general ed curriculum. Also, these are comprehension skills that are taught and practiced in the general ed setting. They're expected in grade appropriate standards. So I would say that yes, this is aligned to 4th and 5th grade ability level. So how would you rate this intervention on instructional alignment? Based on these things, I'd give it a 3 because it really does address all of her needs without any of the other stuff. The next dimension is attention to transfer, how much this intervention supports generalization of skills to other contexts. For this, I would say that this intervention has some things in place, right? So it's going to help this. There's a lot of discussion built into each lesson about how the student might use their strategies elsewhere. They get to use checklists every day in sessions. They also get to take those checklists with them into their general ed settings or wherever they go to continue to practice their skills outside of tutoring. However, there really could be a lot more stuff done as part of this intervention to promote transfer. So I would say, yes, there's some there's some attempts to promote transfer, but there's not enough. Also, this intervention does not include narrative text or fictional text, which is something Arianna does better with. And so an intervention that did a little bit better to promote transfer might include some additional fiction text, some additional context for her to practice her strategies to help promote transfer in some other ways. So overall, I would say that this intervention would get a 2 for attention to transfer. There's some things that are being done, but there could be more for sure. All right.
Megan?
Yeah.
Megan, this is
Yeah.
Tessie. So we've had a lot of questions that people are trying to understand where the scale for the ratings are coming from. In the chat box, I did put a sort of summary of the 0 to 3 rating scale. They weren't sure that what the scale was, but they wanted to know how you're making those decisions, whether it's a 2, 3, are you using a rubric or something else?
Yeah, so when it comes to strength, that's pretty easy. I could say 3 would be something that is would be strong or large. A 2 would be a moderate effect size. A 1 would be all small effect sizes, and a 0 would be no effect at all. So strength is a little bit easy. When it comes to the other dimensions, this isn't a super exact science, especially in the area of comprehension, unfortunately. 3 typically means it couldn't be better than what it currently is. So if we look at alignment, this is exactly aligned to the deficits that Arianna is demonstrating right now. So that's why I would give it a score of 3 instead of a score of 2 for alignment. As far as dosage goes, compared to what they're getting in their in another setting, I know as a special ed teacher, I could have group sizes of up to 17 kids. I know that's really high for special ed, but I know that that happens. And so 2 to 1 and making sure that I could get 45 minutes in a 2 to 1 setting with a student, that's pretty hard to come by. And so we know that that's intensive in terms of dosage. And especially when we're thinking about a reading comprehension intervention, that's a pretty high dose. So I would say when thinking about reading comprehension and how much a student normally gets, that's a pretty high amount of dosage. So that's why I'd give it a 3. A 2 might be that it's an intervention to be used in a small group setting, so they do it every day, but it's a group of 15 or 5 to 10 kids. That would be a moderate group size, or maybe it's a 30-minute intervention. That'd be moderate. I'd give it a 2. If it's smaller than that, I probably would give it a 1. If it's like once a week or once a month, that's a 0. That's not enough dosage. So transfer can be a little tricky. I think it's one of those areas where we need to think about it more as a field. We need to try harder. I know I've spent the last year really thinking about this area, and I can tell you for a fact that I don't know that there's anything out there that moves us to a 3 yet for attention to transfer. I think there's attempts by most intervention platforms to try and to think about it. And so I would say that's moderate evidence. I would say if they really do it, if that FAR transfer effect size had been large, they would have been doing something that helped students transfer their skills. But it's always something that needs, I think, to be better right now in all the interventions that I've seen. So I would say that this is an area that's a 2, definitely in reading detectives, but I've seen it to be a 2 in a lot of other interventions. So I know that that's not super clear. It's a little bit like clear as mud, but hopefully that helps. Does that help a little bit, Tessie?
It does, yeah. I think it's just, we were trying, because on the handout, I think people are noting that the rating scale is not there. So,
yes.
But we will be adding it.
Okay, great. Yeah, that's wonderful feedback, and thank you for that, everyone who's listening. The next dimension of the taxonomy that we would think about is comprehensiveness, and this is the extent to which an intervention includes explicit teaching principles. The first is that it provides directions in simple, direct language. The Reading Detectives program is fully scripted. It's been tested and there's been multiple iterations of it. So the language is very direct, and it's been tested with 4th and 5th grade students to make it as clear as possible. So I would give it a 3. That means there's strong evidence. The second component of an explicit strategies would be that it models efficient solution strategies for reading comprehension. These are things like how to make a main idea, how to answer a factual question, how to determine what vocabulary words, and how to check for understanding. If it teaches those strategies directly, that's an explicit component. This intervention does. It teaches several different strategies very explicitly, so I would give it a score of 3. There's strong evidence of that. That ensures students have adequate background knowledge and skills. This particular program comes with media libraries to support the background knowledge of students for each of these units. It also recognizes, okay, these are where they might have a gap here in this paragraph. They might not understand this. Check this to make sure that students are. It provides very intense feedback tables for students. So I would give it a score of 3 for that area. Also, it provides gradual fading of support, and it moves from the tutor or the interventionist providing all the support to the peer providing support to the student doing that, doing it independently on their own. So I would say there's strong evidence. However, the one component that I think there could be more of in the Reading Detectives program is more opportunities for the student to practice all by themselves. So it's always done in a peer setting, 2 to 1. So that means that the peer is always there. And I think the fact that you have a tutor in front of you or an interventionist in front of you and a peer next to you means that there's always some support. And I think that one thing that could make this intervention more intense would be that the student had some opportunities to practice all by themselves without those safety nets in place. So that's just an area where I think there are lots of chances to practice, but I think there could be more independent chances. So that's why I scored it a 2. I think it's a moderate, there's a moderate amount of practice here, but I think there could be more. And that this intensive intervention program incorporates systematic cumulative review. Students continue to practice the same strategies throughout the program. They just get more, the text gets slightly more difficult. The level of support becomes less and less as students go through, but they're constantly reviewing what they've been taught. So I gave it a 3 for that as well. So overall, for comprehensiveness, based on all those things, I would say it's about a 2.8. Most of the explicit teaching principles are demonstrated very well in this program. However, maybe we could look at that independent practice component, and that might be an area to potentially target in the future. All right, and the last dimension that we're going to rate during the setup phase is behavioral support. And this is the extent to which the intensive intervention platform incorporates self-regulation and executive function components, and then the extent to which the IEP incorporates behavioral principles to minimize non-productive behavior. So I gave this scores of 2 for both of these areas. There are checklists that students are using during the session to self-regulate their use of strategies. They are using some executive function components. So in that sense, there is moderate evidence, but there could always be more. And I think they're always doing that with a partner. So they have somebody whose job it is, and the tutor's making sure is providing them the support to remind them of their strategies. I think without that, there could be a little bit more. And executive function, I think you could always push that envelope a little further. So I said there's moderate evidence. This intervention also includes like a point system and like a point sheet, and students, as they follow the rules are reviewed at the beginning of every session. And as they're doing things well, they get points. They can trade in those points for prizes. I think that that's a pretty good system as a baseline. However, that's not individualized behavioral support. So a student with a more significant behavioral need, like a student with autism or a student with attention deficit disorder who is needing this intervention, you're going to need more behavioral supports for that student. So right now, I would say there's moderate. There's basically a baseline behavior system in place that I would give it a score of 2. It's not the most intense option, right? So overall for behavioral support, I would score this intervention with a score of 2.
So Meagan,
all right. Yeah.
We have a question about how do you know all the pieces about reading detectives to make these particular ratings?
Right. So
like, is this prior to implementation or after implementation?
This will be prior to implementation. So you would be judging based on you probably would want to look at the research on this intervention. You'd want to look at a sample lesson. So hopefully the research would tell you, okay, this is how many sessions are included. You can see the number of lessons. You can look through the sample lessons to see what behavioral components are included. If you're reading about a validated tier 2 measure, most of the research reports will tell you, okay, how did they control for behavior in the setting? What strategies were taught? How were the strategies taught? You can look at the language used in one of the lesson scripts to see, okay, does this seem pretty simple and direct? What kind of practice is involved? So all of this is coming from looking at one, maybe a lesson, a sample lesson, and then like the effect sizes would be reported in the research. And the NCII tools chart is really great. It does provide a lot of example, and it gives you the effect sizes disaggregated where possible for students below the 20th percentile. It tells you the different components that are taught. So it's a great place to start. And then you can seek out additional information by looking at, the research as it's the published research, but also looking at some sample lessons. So it does require a little bit of digging on the front end. All right, so at this point, we're looking at our overall rating that we've had. In a perfect world, Ms. Smith would be comparing several different interventions to each other. For the purpose of today's webinar, we're only going to talk about this one. But in a perfect world, you might be looking for the best option, and you're probably thinking about maybe more than one student. So you're looking at the best option overall. Looking at these scores, we want to think, okay, what's the overall intensity of this intervention platform? And the average of all these would be about a 2.6. That means that it's pretty strong. A 3.0 would mean it's perfect. It's very intensive. It would perfectly align for this student, right? And ideally, we'd be looking and say, okay, I have one that's rated a 2.4, one that's rated a 2.7. Which one works best for this student, for the situation that I have working with? But for today, for the purposes of the example, we're only going to talk about this one. So we did step one, rate the intensive intervention platform. The second step of the DBI process would be to make initial adjustments to the program. Thinking about how we rated the different areas, we can identify and think about what were some of the shortcomings that were already part of the Reading Detectives program. We know that there could be more attention to transfer. This program is focused exclusively on nonfiction text. We know that comprehension involves lots of different types of text, and it's fiction and nonfiction, and it can come in lots of different formats, from a recipe card to a poster you see on a wall to a textbook to a magazine article or a newspaper article, right? There's lots and lots of formats that it can take. So this intervention could have some more transfer instruction built in. We also know that all the practice is completed with a partner. So potentially we're going to need to think about how we're going to get Arianna some chances to practice all by herself so she can't rely on her partner at all. And we know that Arianna has a little bit trouble staying focused. She seems distracted in class, and sometimes she seems withdrawn. She has trouble participating in discussion. She can seem pretty quiet. So maybe the behavioral support that's currently part of this program is going to need to be intensified to help Arianna as we move forward. So I would think about these things. These are shortcomings and things that I might modify to begin with. But at this point, I'm going to avoid making those major substantive changes until I can gauge how she's doing in response to based on my progress monitoring data. Okay, the third part of the setup phase for DBI is to identify a progress monitoring system. Now, most validated tier 2 interventions, especially in reading comprehension, don't include a great progress monitoring tool. So you're going to probably need to go find one that's going to work for you. You can't just use a fluency form if you're giving a reading comprehension intervention. So you're going to want to find something that's going to allow you to track her progress in the area of comprehension. So I mentioned that NCII tools chart again. It's really great for finding progress monitoring tools. So you can go on there, you can find reading, and you can specifically look at how you're going to assess comprehension. Based on the NCI tools chart, I do find a couple different things, but one of them costs money, and Ms. Smith works in a school where she doesn't have a lot of extra funds, so she goes with the Maze Fluency because that doesn't cost anything, and she feels it's going to work pretty well for Arianna. And she decides that she's going to progress monitor her every week, and she's going to make decisions every 6 weeks. Comprehension is a slower growing area. So typically we don't expect like fluency, maybe a word or two per week would be something you could expect. In math, they learn a skill, they continue to practice that skill. You should see an increase in problem solved per minute if you're giving a calculation intervention. Comprehension grows a little bit more slowly and a little bit more unevenly typically. So we're going to wait 6 weeks between to evaluate and see if we're making progress. The CBM maze, basically you have a first line of a story, and then after that every 7th word, or a first sentence of a story, and then after that every 7th word is removed, and in its place is the student is provided with 3 options. They choose the one that works to fill the blank, and it's scored by the number of restorations, words that are chosen correctly for each blank in 3 minutes. And you can see on the side, the right side, what the benchmarks would be. So for Arianna, she's given a benchmark and she doesn't do too well. Okay, she's given a 5th grade benchmark because she's at 5th grade. She's only getting about 6 or 7 restorations correct in the time provided. So she's just really struggling. She's reading pretty far, but she's just not choosing the right things. So what you would do is probably go down a level for Arianna, give her a 4th grade passage and see how she does in a 3rd grade passage. You're going to try to find basically where she would be in kind of the 25th percentile. So there's kind of a chance for her to make some progress at that level. At the 4th grade level, she's pretty close. I don't want to go all the way down to a 3rd grade level because her fluency is pretty good. So I decide that, okay, a 4th grade level is where I'm going to start for her, and I'm going to progress monitor her on the 4th grade passages of the CBM maze. All right, so the fourth step in the setup phase of the DBI process would be to begin implementation. We've selected our best match intervention. We have decided on a progress monitoring tool, and so we start. So the first 2 weeks go by. You can see here we're graphing the first 2 weeks worth of data. At this point, we are just kind of going along, and we're noticing, okay, she hasn't made any progress yet. This is after 2 weeks of instruction. So the question now is, okay, 2 weeks of instruction, she's still at 6. Do we need to make a change? And if yes, what dimension? And the answer to that is no, because it's only been 2 weeks. This is a little bit of a trick question. We don't have enough data collected to modify the intensive intervention platform at this time. My advisor, Dr. Doug Fuchs, he once told me that 3 data points or 2 data points do not a trend make. We need at least 6. So we're not ready to decide if it's a trend yet. So we need to continue collecting some data. It is important to note, though, that if for some reason you have decided, okay, I'm going to do this intervention, but every day at intervention time, Arianna gets pulled for something else, or there's an assembly every day, or she leaves school early and she never gets to come to intervention, that would be one time when you might make an adjustment, like switching her to another time when you can know that you're going to be able to provide this intervention with fidelity, so that you can honestly assess whether she's making progress or not. All right, so that was the setup phase. Now we're moving into the implementation phase for Arianna. Remember, this is a cyclical process of looking at our data, deciding if we need to make an adjustment, and then using the taxonomy to decide what adjustments to make. Remember, DBI is a validated process for individualizing intervention. It has its roots in the work of Standino and Phyllis Merkin in 1977 at the University of Minnesota. And it's grounded in experimental teaching where we're using data to inform what we do with a student and intensify our intervention. We're collecting weekly progress monitoring data, and then we're using our decision rules to decide when she's not making progress or if she is making good progress. And we'll use the taxonomy then to make adjustments as necessary. Okay, so first 6 weeks of treatment. We're giving her this intervention. These are some things Mrs. Smith is noticing. Arianna is almost always waiting for her partner to speak first, so she'll sit there and kind of wait for the partner to talk. She almost never offers any discussion on her own. That during the session time, because she struggles with demonstrating main ideas and doing practicing these strategies, it's taking way more than 45 minutes. So we're only getting to a portion of a lesson in the 45-minute time we have. And often it seems like Arianna's getting a little distracted. She seems like the more difficult the task is, the more she tends to zone out. And you can see on the right here that Arianna, you can see the slope of change here is not good, right? So she's just basically made no progress. Yeah, there's one point where she went up one restoration in the time, but for the most part, she's just basically flatlined. So should Ms. Smith make a change? And if yes, what dimension should she make? Won't you think about that for a second? And yes, okay, we decided that if she wasn't making the progress, see the goal line on our graph, if she's not meeting that goal line, if her trend isn't going up, we need to make a change. It's been 6 weeks. She has not made progress. It's time to make a change. The question is what dimensions? So based on the diagnostic data and what we know that Arianna is not deriving any benefit from working with her partner. She's not completing lessons during a single session. So I think at this point, Ms. Smith is going to need to make a change to dosage. Okay, this 2-to-1 setting isn't working for her. She needs some time where she actually has to sit with a teacher and have some chances to talk all by herself without waiting for her partner. Also, she might need to implement self-pacing, meaning letting Arianna go as far as she can in 45 minutes and then just picking up where she left off so she doesn't miss important strategy practice because we're cutting lessons off. So we're going to make a change to the dosage. And then we're also going to think about that behavioral support component, right? She's having a lot of difficulty attending and persisting during difficult tasks. So this is an area that we can change pretty easily. We might use a timer. We might give her the opportunity to award herself points every time she meets her goal of focusing for a certain amount of time or participating in discussion for a certain amount of time, right? Typically, dosage and behavioral support are two areas that we can adjust pretty easily. And I say easily, meaning logistically, it might be difficult to find time to meet one-on-one with a student, but it doesn't mean that you have to go to the NCI tools chart and find another strategy or another thing to teach her or another program, right? These are kind of the baseline things that we can change and adjust to try to intensify this intervention. So we've identified these things as the areas where we're going to make some adjustments. Now it's time to implement those adjustments. All right, so we implement those adjustments and then we start right over with that process of DBI, right? We're implementing the program, collecting data, and then 6 weeks later, we're looking at our data again to decide if progress has been made, okay? So we're looking at the time between week 7 and week 12, and we note that, again, our slope of change is about a negative 0.14, right? That is not growth, it's not going up. Some other things we're noticing, she's really having difficulty comprehending the words in the text, specifically those that are identified as vocabulary words, but also some of the words that weren't identified as vocabulary words. We're also noticing she really has very limited background knowledge. So she doesn't know anything about chimpanzees or national parks or any of the terms or ideas about continents, about any of these things. So she's really struggling to comprehend in class. So based on this information, should Ms. Smith make a change? And if yes, what dimension? The answer again would be yes, right? She's not making growth. It's time to think about what she's having difficulty with and make some changes. So we see that Arianna has she's really struggling with the vocabulary, specifically the academic vocabulary. So we need to do something to address that need. And this would be the instructional alignment component because it's just not offering her enough in that area. So we're going to do something, semantic feature analysis, to make this intervention more aligned and support her more. Another area that is not aligned for her would be background knowledge. Arianna just doesn't have the background knowledge that she needs to understand these texts. So Ms. Smith might need to go find some additional resources to help Arianna. Now, we can't just tell Arianna, okay, go read some more about this topic area and you'll understand it, because her deficit is in reading comprehension. So we need to think of other ways to get her that background knowledge. So things like media resources, videos, pictures, images can help to give her the skills that she lacks. As far as vocabulary goes, semantic feature analysis is a way that we can provide her with the skills with the vocabulary support that she needs. And this is how it works. What the teacher would do is look at a text, identify all the important terms in the text, and then kind of look at, okay, what are the like superordinate ideas here, the most important ideas? So things like in a text about protest, things like laws, peaceful, civil rights movement, heroes, and protest would all be very key superordinate concepts. So what I would do is put those in a chart on the top, and then I would put all the other ideas on the left side of my chart. And each time we encounter a word, we would talk about, okay, change things. Does this have a positive relationship with protest or a negative relationship with protest? And we would initiate a discussion around each word and how it relates to these superordinate ideas. Okay, so Ms. Smith is going to implement that to help support her vocabulary knowledge in class. And then she's also going to add some additional media discussions. She's going to find some more pictures. She's going to find some things to support that background knowledge. So those are the adjustments she's going to make this program more aligned and more intense for Arianna. And she's going to implement those adjustments. And we're going to move into weeks 13 to 18. And we notice that as we look at this, her graph here, you can see that Arianna has made some pretty decent progress. Is she at her goal line? No. But when we compare how she was doing at the last check to this, she's made a pretty significant growth, right? 0.82. This is more than what we would expect per week. 0.25 would be adequate growth. So we're thinking, okay, she's doing pretty well. Some things Ms. Smith notices: she's more confident in discussion, she's making connections within and across text, she's starting to answer some inferential questions, she's beginning to identify main ideas independently, and she's really starting to ask some questions, and she looks a whole lot more engaged. So at this point, should Ms. Smith make any more adjustments? If yes, what dimension? And here, because we're seeing good progress, because she is on track to meet her goal, we would not make any changes at this point. All right. Instead, we would just keep implementing the intervention as we had been. So that's exactly what Ms. Smith does. She continues to implement the intervention weeks 19 to 24, and lo and behold, her slope of improvement does not go up during these weeks. She's doing much better during tutoring, though, and Ms. Smith noticed that she's correctly answering types of questions. She's making main ideas all by herself. She's identifying themes. She's really engaged in discussions. But outside of tutoring, outside of her intervention time, she's really continuing to struggle in her classes, and her grades have just not been going up. And to top it all off, the universal screen that was done at her school revealed that her oral reading fluency has pretty much plateaued, it's stagnated, and it hasn't improved at all since the beginning of the year. So at this point, should Ms. Smith modify the intervention? If yes, what dimensions? And yeah, right, her slope has not gone up, and despite the fact that she's doing really well on the skills in tutoring, she's still having a lot of other difficulties that are showing up in other places. So what should she do? Well, we're going to modify a couple different areas. First, we're going to look at the alignment component. Okay, Arianna's fluency hasn't improved. Remember, fluency was not included at all in this intervention package. So now we see an issue with fluency that wasn't there at the beginning of the year. So we need to start building that in to make it more aligned for her. So we're going to add a repeated reading component. Repeated reading component hopefully will help give her some fluency practice and start moving that fluency up again. But we also need to start thinking about at this point, since she's doing well in tutoring, but not outside of tutoring, that there's a transfer problem happening here. So we know, and we knew that this was a potential issue, right? Back when we rated this intervention, we knew that this could be a thing that happened. So Arianna's not transferring the skills she learned in tutoring to other contexts. So we need to do some things to help that. So we're going to look at this transfer component, give her some time with some other types of text like fiction. Maybe we're going to bring in a magazine. Maybe we're going to just kind of switch it up, make it look like a test, make it look like this. Lots of different variety to help start getting her to think about transfer. Also, remember I said that the comprehensive component, there was one thing that was missing in the setup phase, and that was independent practice. Maybe at this point, to make it more comprehensive, I'm going to give Arianna some additional practice assignments to help try to get her to take ownership of these strategies, so hopefully she'll transfer better. So I can make this intervention more comprehensive and more aligned, and hopefully all of these three things are going to actually help each other. So these are three areas of the taxonomy or dimensions that I can intensify, hopefully to help her get back on track towards her goal. And that's what I do. Or Ms. Smith does. In weeks 25 through 30, she implements those adjustments with the program, and she looks at her data, and lo and behold, Arianna has actually made quite a bit of progress, right? See how she has exceeded her goal line? Her slope is really great. Ms. Smith is noticing that she's participating more in class discussions outside of tutoring. She's attempting difficult tasks on her own, even if she doesn't get them right every time. And her grades are just starting to improve in some of those content area classes, although there's still a lot of work to be done, right? There's still a lot of things that aren't perfect. Maybe she's moved from an F to a D in her science and social studies class, but it's improvement, right? So she's met the goal of this intervention, and she's where she should be. So at this point, Ms. Smith would probably go on that DBI process and go back to the drawing board and find a new validated best matched tier 2 intervention for Arianna to move her the rest of the way.
Great. Thank you so much, Megan. It was a very informative presentation about how to use the taxonomy and DBI to intensify a reading comprehension intervention. We do have time for a couple questions, and we have one that just came in is, what was the duration of the intervention, and when would a movement decision among tiers be made?
Right. So this intervention is written for 45 sessions because she went to self-pacing. Basically, she's getting this program kind of every day and just going as far as she can every day. I would say that if she were making progress with the intensity of intervention that is in place and she's meeting her goals, she probably would stay in the tier that she's in. However, if you continue to intensify this intervention and she's not getting it, that may mean that she needs to go to a more intensive tier. And this is kind of a difficult question to answer because every school and every district in every state has a different tiered system. So for some districts and places, you have tier 1, tier 2, and special ed. Some places have tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, tier 4, and then special ed. In Arianna's case, until because she was identified with a reading disability in her district, she would stay in special ed until she has met all the grade level standards and the team feels like she doesn't need any support moving forward. We might kind of bring the intensity of the support down for her, but she would stay in that special ed tier, right? Because we want to continue to give her those scaffolds just in case she starts to fall back again. However, if she had been a tier 3 student and maybe there is a tier 4 in your school, those first couple data points where she's not making improvement and she goes to one-on-one, that's probably going to be whatever tier 4 is in your school or whatever that next tier is. So it's kind of hard to answer that question globally because there are aspects of it that depend on the school. However, I wouldn't make any decisions about or your state, yeah, and the laws and the rules and how your state interprets the laws. That can all change how you decide when you're moving to another tier.
And the National Center on Intensive Intervention has a number of resources that can really help you define what those tiers are. We did get a question about what would you suggest for schools to determine that criteria. If you look through the resources that are there, when we think about data-based individualization, we assume at a tier 2 or a supplemental support that you are providing a group type intervention that is designed to meet the needs of most students. And when most students are benefiting and an individual student is not, then that would likely be a trigger that would indicate that the student needs much more intensive or individualized supports. It's not as clear-cut as I think we would like it to be, which is why a lot of schools struggle with implementing Tier 3. But if you would check out those resources, I think there are some tables on there that really help delineate the tiers. And if you've listened to Dr. Lynn Fuchs, she'll often talk about some of the bigger pitfalls about implementation of a tiered system of support. And one of the biggest barriers that we find to successful implementation is the lack of clarity among the tiers of support. You know, regardless of how you define them, but distinguishing between what is really supplemental group intervention versus what is intensive intervention. And that's really what the taxonomy was intended to do, was help you determine how you intensify for an individual versus how you might intensify for a group intervention, which would be more in the Tier 2 level. So we have time for one more question. We did get a question too about how do you increase dosage without increasing time when you don't have a lot of time to add to your school day or your schedule is really tight?
That's a great question, and that's something I definitely struggled with as a teacher. You're given certain amounts of time in the day, right? And students have to get a certain amount of core reading instruction and a certain amount of core math, and they have to have their specials and their recess and their lunch, and you can't touch those things, right? So sometimes you have to be a little bit flexible in how you provide the time. So looking at the ratio of adults to students, if you can utilize a para to support a student specifically for a portion of time, so they're getting one-on-one attention from either you or that para. Also, peer-mediated instruction is a way to intensify something when you have a group of 6 or 8 kids in a room. Maybe there's a way to use the peers to give them more opportunities to respond and receive feedback from their peer, but so you can get a little bit flexible that way. Also looking at the lessons themselves and thinking, okay, how can I increase the opportunities that a student has to respond to me in this lesson, whether it means more chances to read or to answer the questions. If there's a way they can answer kind of using one of those, like, you know, a dry erase board where they just show you the answer, but they're doing it much more often. You give them more questions to answer every day at the end, or more main ideas to make. You make the passages longer. If you can look at opportunities to respond and think about it a little bit more flexibly than just how many minutes are they spending, but making the most out of the minutes that they have with you so that they're responding a lot. For me, that means looking at how much I'm talking and trying to find ways that I can make that much simpler, more direct. You probably wish I did that today, but it's thinking about it that way so that I spend more time letting them try the strategies so that they can receive feedback from me. And the more they talk too, especially in comprehension, the more they're getting. So I try to find lots of ways to increase discussion, whether it's through the text that I choose or through the media sources that I find to supplement the text. I try to find things that are going to make the kids talk and talk at a deeper level in hopes that that will intensify the dosage and their opportunities to respond that way.
Great. And something else to think about is how you might distribute those opportunities across the school day. I think too often we think in a very narrow sense of when an intervention occurs, that it's this 30 or 45-minute block at a certain time, but you could potentially provide multiple opportunities throughout the day at 2 to 5 minutes that increase their access, but it's just distributed.
Yeah, that's a really great point, Tessie.
Yeah.
I often would work with like a speech and language pathologist for students who had reading comprehension goals and think about, okay, how can I make sure that they're getting this, that we're working together to accomplish the same when we're working together on the same goals. So we would try to kind of match what we were doing between speech and the resource room special ed context. And then I would also try to think about like, okay, what are they doing in their gen ed classroom in science and in social studies? How can I work with the general ed teacher or the tier 1 teacher to try to see that they get a chance to practice this skill there? That's going to help with transfer, but it's also going to help with dosage too.
And I just posted in the chat box a new resource that was released today by the Council for Exceptional Children in the Cedar Center. and it really focuses on the use of high leverage practices. And those resources talk about how you can improve access to Tier 1 for students with disabilities, but also increasing intervention through practices, 22 high leverage practices that include things like increasing opportunities to respond, high quality feedback, and eliciting discussion. Well, I want to thank everyone and thank you, Meagan, for a wonderful presentation. After the webinar series, so we have one more, we will be posting a Q&A resource that includes the questions collected here as well as our other 2 sessions. So if we weren't able to get to your question today, we will answer it there. And as with most webinars, you probably now have more questions. Several resources were shared with you today to support your learning. NCII has also posted these on its website. These include the 2 tools that we had, but also Meagan has done a recording. I know a lot of folks asked about, wanting more information about the dimensions. This recording provides a much more in-depth discussion about each of those dimensions. It's about 20 minutes. It's a great PD resource for staff meetings. The full webinar for today will also be posted on the website. There are a number of other resources that the National Center on Intensive Intervention does put out. You'll see some we have a comprehensive module series that comes with PowerPoint presentations, facilitator guides, handouts, as well as recorded webinars like what you see today. And then finally, I just want to point out that the tools charts that Meagan mentioned multiple times, we have screening tools charts, progress monitoring tools charts, intervention tools charts, both in behavior and academics. And we also have a resource around diagnostic assessments. We don't do a tools chart, but we do provide common free resources that folks can use in the intensification process. So I want to thank you for joining us today. If you'd like to learn more about DBI and the Taxonomy of Intervention, stay connected to us. Check out our website or follow us on Twitter or YouTube. You will be receiving an evaluation about an hour after today's session, and we really appreciate your feedback. So thank you very much for attending.